I think so. That's okay, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd like to say thank you for coming along on a Sunday morning. I know you probably want to be in church or in a car boot sale, but it's great to have you here. And this talk is entitled The Megaliths of the Mayenne. Just make sure I'm moving the right way. There we go. So it's situated in this region here, around Fougères, north of Rennes. And sorry, there we go. I've got my little laser beam. Here we go. It's in this region here. Half 2 hours drive from Carnac, which is down on the coast, just here around the Lorient Peninsula. Now you can see where 4 years at art college has come in very handy. These are some of the sites that I'll be talking about. They're all situated. This is the Mayenne region here. This will give you some idea of time scale. These dates are approximate. The Neolithic era was the latest period of the Stone Age, between approximately 6000 and 1800 BC. This prehistoric by way of the Danubian Channel. That's the northern channel between the ice sheets, so that was the route that they had to take between the ice sheets. Peoples arrived from the east to settle Brittany's fertile land, and over a period of time, many differing belief systems intermingled and created the hundreds of different megalithic structures that we see today in the area. Pottery shards have been found, some of them amongst the packing material found at the base of the megaliths, the monuments which could be elaborated on throughout the decades. This is a picture of Carnac. I didn't actually take this photograph. But, Julian Cope puts it quite succinctly in his book, The Megalithic European. There is a particular rigour about Breton Megalithica that reveals Neolithic humanity at its most insightful and visionary. Monuments here were created for use, and when that usefulness failed, they were modified or torn down and incorporated into other monuments. What nowadays appears to be evidence of one It is with this in mind that I have approached the sites of the Mayenne, as they fall loosely into various categories, and I hope to give you an overview of these diverse sites throughout history. I want to start with the giant single menhirs. This one's in the south of the Mayenne. There's evidence to suggest, and there seems to be a general consensus amongst archaeologists, that these were the earliest monuments. As a settler, man literally became the centre of the world is the ancient rock at Golgotha, and the Omphalos rock at Delphi in Greece was considered to be the navel of the world. The permanence of a tree or a rock or a mountain would have taken on new meaning to the settler, being something certain that he could return to. These permanent natural features literally became pillars of the world because they represented something eternal, and this was exactly what the settler aspired to in an unpredictable world. Is that they are written in stone. They speak to us of thousands of years of man's creativity. Dom Gregoire de Rostrenen published a dictionary in 1732 which gives the word menhir as an equivalent for pillar. I'll just clarify the terms. A menhir literally means a stone standing or a long stone, and a dolmen literally means a table stone. So this usually this is the Menhir de la Une at Bazouges. It's a monstrous single menhir in the south of the Mayenne, and it's one of the largest in the department. John Michel wrote, "The eye is naturally inclined to anthropomorphize." And when I look at this menhir, and I'm sure you can as well, you can see a giant face there. It's a slightly Disney face, but you can see, if we can see forms suggested by natural shapes, then the ancients could too. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that sites and stones were chosen because of this. Because the spirits in the stones may still be visible to the careful observer. Many of the menhirs at Karnak have faces as well. This one's regularly graffitied with a face because, you just look at it and you see a face. Right? So they have obvious human or animal shapes. Shamanic practices are evidence that many ancient peoples believed that spirits inhabited the rocks. This example close to Karnak that we've seen before yesterday. To visualize simulacra in the natural world is an archetypal experience. Even Leonardo da Vinci advised his students to study the landscapes formed by mould on his studio walls. So standing stones all over the world are attributed with the behaviour of living things, dancing, walking down to the water, etc. This example is behind my local supermarket. Up this sign, which I think is a fantastic example of folklore that's carried on into culture these days, into modern culture. It actually says, on the night of Christmas, during the 12 rings of the bell, the stone turns 12 times upon itself, and all the cows get on their knees, which is, it's obviously the children have done this. Of cattle is interesting too, as there is evidence to suggest that many of the Breton stones are associated with an ox cult. To the settler, the ox was symbolic of the masculine role in rural fertility, and this is a very potent image alongside the mother goddess. So this is St. Cornelius on the front of the church in Karnak. Now, as you can see, this could have been a modern version of drawing the cattle together at the semicircular stone cromlechs in Brittany, which are at the end of the long lines of stones. The Celtic saint's name, Corneli, also sounds suspiciously like a Christianized version of horned god. And this is the church in Polissoir in Brittany, and 6,000 years previously, this is on the roof. Here you can see that it's a cult that's gone on for many thousands of years. This isn't actually in the Mayenne region, but I've put this in as a comparison because this is down the coast about 2 hours to the southwest, and it's absolutely huge. It's, the giant menhirs aren't restricted to this region, they're actually all over France. So shape. I think they probably did that on purpose. This is another one with quite an interesting shape. And this one's actually as far south as the Pyrenees, so they do go a long way down. This is huge. This is actually a natural outcrop of rock, but I believe that they used those as well as places of worship or whatever. Material has been found to date these things, but this is up the road from me in the Mayenne, near the Orne, the River Orne. They may have been ancestor stones or territorial boundaries erected by the first settlers. It has been said that when a finger points at the moon, the fool looks at the finger, so I think we've probably got an awful lot of looking left to do. If these fingers are pointing at the moon or at the stellar constellations, then we have a lot of things left to look at, because there's not many. Obviously, water was sacred and of greatest importance to Neolithic man as it is to us, but we we don't place as much emphasis on it. We don't realise how sacred it is, probably until our taps stop working. This menhir is situated on the river. Have a sort of pointy side and a flat side. I don't know why that is. This is a little further up the same river. Again, it's at an angle. There are people, archaeologists, to the madness of location. Actually, this one's further up the Mayenne River, and again, this is its flat side. The Mayenne's quite a large river as well. And to prove that there's no method to the madness of where the stones are, this one isn't anywhere near a river. It's up on a hill. This one's called the Menhir du Perron. Not a lot is known about this one either. I spoke to the man who lives there, and he said that the other stones close to this stone were put there by his grandfather and his father as a joke, but I'm not so sure about that because I had a look at the site, and there's various stones. This is obviously been shaped, this one, and there's one lying on the ground to the right of that, which is of a similar shape. I'm not even sure. This is another one lying on the ground quite close to that one. So again, you can see that it's been shaped. The owner also told me that the saucer-shaped stone facing the menhir was original and possibly caught the shadow of the menhir at a significant time, but you can't actually see this now because a lot of them have been knocked down, there's a lot of planting around, and there's trees as well. So if it was aligned to a perpetual reminders of pre-Christian religions, and if they weren't destroyed or used as building material, they were often converted to Christianity in many ways. That's that site again. So this is actually a megalithic site. It's just marked on the map as a megalithic site, and of it. But there's piles of rocks on all the hills. There's shaping in the earth. You can see earthworks. That's a mound in the background that you can see there that has a dolmen on top of it. There's various other dolmens that are dotted about literally in this one valley. So I think it was a fairly significant site, but nobody's even investigated it. You know, it's never been excavated. Nobody's ever looked at the alignments or anything. So it's worth coming over to check it out if you're. Carved in the side of it where they could place a cross or a statue. It's 5 meters high, and it's sometimes known as La Pierre Longue. It's actually right by the edge of a road now, which is a shame. It's literally the roadside is right there. But it's a very magical stone. The story goes that St. Michael and the devil were arguing over the ownership of the Mont Tombe. That's the natural island of rock with the Mont Saint-Michel on it, which is the equivalent of the Mount St. Michael in Cornwall. It's the same shape. It's actually more visited. The French equivalent of the Mount St. Michael in Cornwall is it's a fantastic site. I haven't actually got a photograph of it. There's a story that goes that St. Michael and the devil were having an argument over who would have the ownership of the Mont Tombe. And this stone is one of the massive. He was challenged to erect something first on the Mont Tombe. He grabbed a couple of stones, ran back to the Mont Tombe, and found that St. Michael had already erected an abbey on the site and was sitting having a cup of tea with Kevin. One of them that landed here, and the other one landed at Dol which I'm sure you've seen photographs of the stone at Dol. This one is actually further down the coast in Brittany. In another attempt to impose Christianity on our dark heathen history, the Virgin Mary carved in the centre with the sun and the moon above her and various instruments of the Passion around her. Bretons still follow practices that the Church would prefer to forget. To this day, for instance, they continue to offer coins at Menhirs to anoint them with butter, and according to a fantastic tourist leaflet that I picked up recently, childless women will persist in rubbing themselves against standing stones to achieve fertility. I'm afraid I don't actually have a slide of that one. This one's known as the Menhir de Clivoy. This is in the Mayenne region. This is I'm not actually sure what kind of rock this stone is. I would imagine it's granite with quartz running through it. But it's a very beautiful blue colour. If you look back towards the local town of Chailand, you can see that. This is known as La Roche de la Vierge, so it's the Rock of the Virgin. So it's actually Now, lots of later axe heads are actually made of bronze, were found at the Rock of the Virgin, so it was obviously a very significant site. That's a closer-up picture of it. I think there was probably a hill fort or something on the hill behind, although it's now been turned into gardens, so you can't really see what. Futai, but the ones found at the other site were actually very similar to these. They're very characteristic of the late Bronze Age. In the West, at the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age, there was a massive production of these small-socketed axes. They're rich in lead. They didn't appear to have any practical use because they're quite small. Now, we can only suppose that they were used as objects of marshes around the Mayenne. These places were considered to be liminal, where the living and the gods of the underworld could interact. So axe heads were given as votive offerings. If you look at the shape of this menhir, the Menhir de Clivoy, from the other direction, you can see the rocks on the hill behind and how it's been carved to echo It's another site that's really worth investigating. This is actually a close-up of the stone, so you can see that how beautiful it is, how lovely the quartz running through it is. It's probably appropriate at this time to talk about the significance of the axe head. This recumbent stone is known as the Polissoir. Nobody knows how Pope mentions that only 3 examples of polished stones are now known, one of white quartz outside the Museum of Vannes in Brittany, one known as the Mother's Jam on Fifield Down in Wiltshire, and an inferior example on the British mainland. However, this is another example that we know of. So. It's got various legends attached to it. Tradition names it the Stone of St. William, as it was believed possible to see the imprint of the body of William Fermat on body lay. There were numerous hermits at this time living in the forests of the northwest Mayenne, and they played a role in reclaiming the land of the area, which had gone to ruin after the Viking invasion. Another legend tells us about the devil again. He was there, he's been everywhere. He brought some children here in the night to cut their throats and eat them. This would explain the traces of red on the stone. Finally, it's also said locally to be a stone basically. Polissoir on Fifield Down in Britain is estimated to have been used for 1,200 years because its grooves are so deep, and I think that the Mayenne example has had a similar amount of use because the grooves are pretty deep. It's hard to say if this was continuous or intermittent because polishing stones were used right up until the Middle Ages. So. These absolutely perfect. Nobody knows what the circular object was for. They have no idea what that was for. Flint was nowhere to be found in Brittany, so other hard rock was used for making axes. This was either locally sourced or from the Côte d'Or. And on the Côte d'Or, a basalt-like rock called dolerite was common. An axe factory existed here, which was in use from 4000 to 2700 BC, and at the peak of its production, frequently found by Breton farmers who traditionally placed them over the fireplace as they're believed to protect against lightning. Historically, people from this area came to the conclusion that as the axe heads had just appeared in the fields, that they'd fallen from the sky. So in a similar way to meteorites, and they also believed that quartz had the same sort of qualities, so they placed that above the fireplace or in the buildings. This is similar to shamanic beliefs about quartz, which I'll talk about a little later. They would have been used for shaping the body of the axe, and the 7 grooves would have been used to sharpen the cutting edge. In 1923, 2 archaeologists discovered a prehistoric representation of the Great Bear constellation and the Sun on a large block of sandstone that was lost in the lands of Arran in the Mayenne, and they came to the conclusion that there was a star cult in the area in prehistory. Others said that the stone of Arran was not a map of the sky. We can all read things into the stone from our imaginations, and the megalith builders were no exception. Christopher Tilley talks about the earliest non-domesticated megaliths. These were stones which had been sculpted by the elements and exuded a natural monumentality. So they took on a cultural significance to the Mesolithic imagination. So much like the Aboriginal, an example of this exists in the Mayenne forest. This is quite an obscure site. You have to sort of go crawling through the undergrowth to get to this. But it's a magical natural feature. It's called Montpinçon, and you can see that it looks like a face looking to the heavens. And within literally 100 yards of here, just below, is an allee-couverte, and then back in the woods a bit is another allee-couverte. And he goes on to talk about the varying size of such phenomena, ranging from a modest outcrop looking like a human profile, as we have here, to a mountain range suggesting the breasts or reclining body of an Earth Mother goddess, like we have at Callanish in Scotland. The 2 sites close to Montpinçon are both allee-couverte. This is one of them. This is the Dolmen de la Cotte. An allee-couverte is a chambered tomb without a mound, although there are traces of a mound. It's a rectangular chambered tomb consisting of several dolmens that form a covered alley. It faces 79 degrees east. That's the same as quite a few others in the department as well. This is from the front angle. It's quite small, this one. And this is the other allee-couverte, which is further down. It's quite ruined. The oldest monument in the Mayenne is the Dolmen des Hervés, which is this one. A stag antler pick was found at the base of one of the upright stones here, which was most likely used in its construction. This enabled radiocarbon dating of the monument at between 4700 and 4000 BC. It belonged to a group of 3 dolmens and 1 menhir, which was still visible until the 19th century. much larger structure. The houses of the dead were the most permanent structures, as opposed to the houses of the living, which were generally made of organic material, and of which there's little evidence left. Two huge slabs rest on support stones to form the main chamber, and the spaces in between these would have been filled with It is situated on a river valley which flows down to the Anjou, so again, it's quite close to water. The cultural influences and traditions of the south would have spread up this valley. It has characteristics close to those of the Angevin dolmens to the southeast, down towards the Loire. These were huge in size as well, but it's unlikely that they were ever covered with cairns. At least 14 individuals, including objects placed with the dead included bracelets, a pierced horse tooth. They've recently found, they've dug up a site in Normandy where they've found about 15 horse heads, so they think there was a horse cult in the area as well. And they also found little shells from the Atlantic. I believe somebody mentioned that yesterday as well, the significance. Pottery with typical incised decoration was found. It was thought to have been used as an incense burner. Andrew Sherratt of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford argues that the appearance of brazier-like ceramic vessels and the profound cultural change in the nature of the monuments and art style. That's debatable. The shape and pattern of the Hervé piece of pottery has been influenced by the Chasséenne culture from Burgundy and the Paris Basin. These goods and ideas have spread westwards through bartering and ceremonial exchange. Is debatable, but they certainly influenced native traditions. There's a ruined dolmen on the hill opposite, which would have been within sight of the Dolmen des Hervés. That's this one. I actually wanted to measure it, but I was pursued by some particularly mean-looking cows, so I did a runner. The eastern side of Brittany has a particularly high concentration of rectangular allee-couverte. An allee-couverte has rectilinear and parallel walls supporting the stones of the roof, which is of constant height. Allee-couverte are generally open to the east. To compare, here are some of the plans of those found in the north of the Mayenne. The orientation of the chamber moonrise, 90 degrees to 123 degrees, which is the equinoctial sunrise, to these two, and 143 degrees to 163 degrees. Aubrey Burle says there are strong reasons for believing that it was astronomical considerations that determined this. There are 68 Neolithic tombs in the Mayenne department alone, and it's quite a small department. With the innovation of farming, a need for tribal and family went by, these monuments became more sophisticated, sometimes with carvings or symbols. Trading networks stretched further afield, enabling societies to become wealthier and more powerful, and goods appeared as a manifestation of this. This vase, which was made in Greece or Italy, was made in the 5th century BC and was found in the Mayenne, so there's evidence that trading was quite, extended quite a long way across Europe at that point. I've never met him down there, unfortunately. But, it's situated at the end of a valley floor within the bend of a river, and it faces northeast. It's 9 meters in length, and the width and the height of the chamber are roughly the same. That's normal. It's debatable whether some of these things were actually used as burial places. They could have been used by the living. It's likely that they were used by the living. That in the later culture would have been based on people utilising these sites. This is its sister dolmen, which is across, just up from it in the same valley. This is called La Tardivière. It's now in a ruin. And it's near Chantrigny. This photo was taken in 1975 before restoration of the tomb took place. And this is after restoration. I'm not sure about their idea of restoration, actually. I don't know how they can know how things were placed. So. In the north of the Mayenne, the ground is so acidic that barely any bones have been preserved, but monuments of the can, but with a lack of significant remains, it is impossible to tell how large it was or what form it took. Archaeological finds here consist of polished axes, carefully made flint daggers, and rough vases without decoration, showing a strong link with the Seine-Marne civilization, or Somme for short, which flourished in the area known as the Paris Basin between 3000 and 2500 BC. The people who made these objects and erected these tombs looked like us, they had the same intellectual abilities as us, and they were socially well organized. Of fairies living in the ruins of this allee-couverte. It's really magical, actually, this one, especially in spring, the light through the trees and stuff. You come up to it through a hill of trees, and it's absolutely beautiful. They're all magical, aren't they? The story of this is that the fairy's cow trampled the crops of a local farmer, so he was generously compensated with a magic loaf, which would It's a cautionary tale. If you meet the fairies there, be careful. Its entrance faces towards the southeast, and it's built of large granite stones, possibly sourced from an outcrop a few metres away. The largest of the 7 capstones weighs over a ton. Some of the allee-couverte, including this one, had an additional cell at their western end, which was blocked from the burial chamber by the end stone. Of breasts, which often occur in terminal cells in Brittany. They think that they would have represented a guardian goddess of the tomb, or some kind of guardian spirit. They often have sort of bellies or necklaces. They call them necklaces, but I think it's more likely to be a belly. You can see it. Just that. And that. Pottery shards and shards of Grumprasini flint were also found at this site, so it's thought that this was influenced by the dolmens of the Paris Basin as well. And you've probably seen photographs of this one before. This is the Roche. This is a huge allee-couverte. Well, we say an allee-couverte, but actually no remains have been found. It's one of the megalithic wonders of Brittany, and it really is. It's the name of it, La Roche-au-Fay, means the Rock of the Fairies. There are hundreds of megalithic sites in France with fairy legends attached to them, although fairy in this sense is a term which encompasses all of the beings from and all sorts of mysterious beings. Aubrey Burl says that one might speculate about an ancestor faces the midwinter solstice sunrise. There's a little pixie there. So it's unlike any other monument in the region in that it's so beautifully cut. It's kind of like, I'll show you on the next one. It's perfect. Some of these slabs weigh in at over 45 tons. Modern experiments using primitive equipment have shown that a 32-ton concrete slab of a similar shape can be moved by 170 people, with another 30 others moving rollers along the path. So this is truly a giant monument. It's 19 metres long, 6 metres wide. This is right at the back of the chamber. It's likely that these Cambrian yellow and reds, and it's a lovely rock. Inside, the gallery has been subdivided into 4 side compartments. The architectural features here would suggest that it's one of a family of monuments, most of which are situated 150 kilometres to the southeast and are known as the Dolmens and Menhirs portique. Folklore tells us that Essay was the burial place of the fairies, whose cries can even now be heard to echo around the stones. It's also said that the spot was used on New Moon by young couples. A happy French couple having a picnic in there when I arrived. That is you, yes. Now, this modest effort in comparison is La Pierre Courculée, which is in the forest of Fougères in the Mayenne. It's a much smaller allee-couverte. The forest of Fougères is home to various megalithic monuments. This tomb is situated in woodland which was formerly It faces east on an axis of about 71 degrees. The capstone was once an enormous single rock weighing in at 20 tons or more, but it's now broken. And looking at the shape of it, I wonder if it wasn't actually a single menhir previously that they reused as a roof stone for their allee-couverte, much like they did with the capstones at Ergra and Carnac. Literally translated, courculée means court force or court flow, which stumped me until I read Julian Cope's theory, which I'll read to you now. Specifically designated area of land that was raised and separated from the everyday. In earliest times, a particular outcrop or knoll would probably have sufficed for such law speaking, but the coming of ancestral mounds and great stone cairns allowed the making of the law to take on a greater. So the name court force takes on a much greater significance when in that light, because you can pinpoint it with a fair degree of certainty as being a place where law was decreed from a mound that they spoke the law from. Or the rope of the Druids. This is a strange place. There's always a strange atmosphere here. Although I often go there in winter, so it's quite an odd place. A line of quartz blocks, unusual this far east. Rows of stones are mainly to be found in the west of Brittany, as at Carnac and various other sites. There's an idea that some of these rows were expressly intended for rites of death. Other quartz rows of this nature exist at Les Alignements de Moulins at Saint-Just in Brittany. It's interesting to note that sites memories of things happening at night there. As late as the 19th century, the locals of Saint-Just would not dare to venture onto the heath after dark for fear of the horrible things to be seen there. At this stage, it's worth discussing the properties of quartz. Pierre and Jacques Curie documented in 1880 that certain crystals, particularly quartz, produced voltage when subjected to friction, and thus produced light as a side effect. However, quartz is most commonly found mineral would have illuminated the dark. The stones were known by the Indians and other tribal peoples around the world as lightning stones, and Mercier Eliade states that the stone would have been regarded as solidified light. This is a rather fantastic example of a pestle and mortar in one of the local museums in the Mayenne in Jublin, and been a ceremonial ritual object, personally. Aubrey Burle suggested that the Cordon des Druides was astronomically aligned with the major northerly risings and southerly settings of the moon, and said the specific choice of quartz for the stones in these rows of lunar whiteness could therefore be of symbolic significance. The rope of the Druids runs in a southwest-northeast direction for approximately 240 metres. All the stones are a beautiful quartz vein. The road leads gently up a slope to the largest stone at its crest. Lines of stones are often associated with burial places. Could it be that funerary rites involving the carrying of the body along the avenues of stones to its final resting place were what happened here? This may have been a later use for the stones, or it may have occurred in megalithic times, we don't know. When I investigated this small allee-couverte near the hamlet of Bignon, and then I searched for another one in the vicinity which was marked on the map, I wonder if this wasn't an old deathway linking the two burial places. The straight track or line in the landscape appears to have been symbolic of spirit travel. Paul Devereux describes a geography of the mind superimposed on the physical landscape. And this menhir is just off the same path. You can see the dip where the path is in the background. This is just so it connects three sites. There are approximately 65 menhirs in 5 lines, and this is all that remains of a much larger complex. In this case, the rows run northwest to southeast, again up a slight incline. The rows are so jumbled that it's difficult to make out their orientation, but Aubrey Burle suggests Beltane or Lugnasa. It's a fact that in 1860 the local priests were attempting to stop people gathering in the midst of the lines for what was described as pagan merrymaking. Shell, but because they were too heavy, they dropped them. This site is absolutely magical as well because you have to clamber through woodland to get there. It's in the Forêt de Luz. It's a small quartz dolmen sitting in the centre of 6 upright stones. So these are the upright stones. This is the dolmen. The site is actually below a rocky outcrop on a ridge. You can just see the hill in the background there. And on the hill, on the rocky outcrop, there's a human profile again. There's also a strange tower from the 16th century with odd carvings on it. I haven't got the photographs of that, but it's another site that's really worth investigating. Magical spot. I almost didn't find it. I almost gave up, and I was wandering around in the nettles, and then this shaft of sunlight came down on this stone, and it actually made me jump because I thought somebody was standing behind me. It was one of those situations. And moving on 2,000 years later than the oldest monument in the Mayenne, this is Le Petit Vieux Sou. Tomb is Le Petit Vieux Sou, which could mean the little old under, referring to the fact that it's a subterranean allee-couverte. It could be translated as the little old soul, which could perhaps allude to the ancient souls who were buried there, or it can be translated as the little old penny, so perhaps as a folk memory of buried treasure. I don't know, there's no definite... Local experts date this allee-couverte to 2,400 years BC. The area in which it is situated has a huge concentration of megalithic tombs. There's over 15 within a 6-kilometre radius of this area. It's indisputably of the same family as the Breton tombs in its orientation, disposition, and architecture. Ancient man found the Colmont River to be a super. As it faces the setting sun, approximately. So It's a lovely site. Very early clay vessels were found here which imitate the form of willow baskets with a deeply rounded shape. So Gabalou, this is just down the road. It's another lateral entry tomb, and although there are others of this type scattered around France, the Netherlands and Denmark, the quadrangular peristolith is unique to this site, so that's the stones that run around the edge, and they would have held the other stones in to stop the whole thing collapsing outwards. Archaeologists suggest that this was a collective tomb, although no bones have been found here, supposedly due to the acidity of the soil. Its construction is similar to other lateral entry tombs, which have been dated using the C14 method, which is only possible when organic material has been found at the site. This was the case at Le Petit Vieux-Sous, but not here. The dates most often found are between 2800 and 2400 BC. Table of the Devil at Passé. It's again a lateral entry type, circa 2500 BC, and again it has the double wall of stones, which is quite unusual, especially in this arrangement. And this is looking along the entrance of the tomb. You can see that it aligns with the local church. Passé was always a sacred area. The whole area around here was very sacred. There's the Fosse d'Arthur, which has legends connected to King Arthur, runs along just out of the shot of the photograph. It's perhaps testament to the pagan power of the place that such an effort was made to Christianize it. Realised that an alliance with the church could only be beneficial in bringing the heathens and the barbarians of the wilderness under their control. So various Merovingian monk hermits were sent out to suppress them. Various Merovingian hermits were sent out to suppress the pagan partying. Now, we know that a cohort of priestesses following a tomb, he was sent out to suppress their partying, and he suffered perhaps the best martyrdom ever conferred on anyone by the church when he was mercilessly shanked to death. No, I'm just joking. He wasn't. No, that didn't happen to him. But he did have an murdered by 3 of his neighbours. St. Bommer has been identified with Bode Magoo, who was king of the land of Gorée, probably the town of Goron in the heart of the Mayenne. Bode Magoo in legend also fell victim to similar treachery. The farm at which this stone rests is called La Tomassier. Could this be a reference to Thomas Becket, who also hailed from the area and also died in a similar way? This is the tomb again. It's canted to all these stories bear a striking resemblance to the fate of Hiram Abiff, who's the central character of the Masonic Third Degree, and he was also murdered by 3 assailants. So I'd be interested if anybody has any ideas about the significance of that story. This is Eleanor of Aquitaine. People of the Arthurian legend. So there's connections to Lancelot as well. Lancelot is associated with the area. In all these stories is the power of their faith, and what could be transmitted to an ordinary pilgrim at their shrines was the power of their faith. So it became evident that the cult of saints, which existed in Passé from the 6th century right up until the 1930s, has its origins in the power of place and the magic of the land. Beliefs established in ancient times were changed and adapted by the working of the human imagination and the needs of the human psyche. Moving on, this is a Stele stone. These are later stones. And supposedly acted as funeral monuments and commemorative stones in the cemeteries, although I'm not so sure. They're numerous in Finistère, Morbihan, and the Western Côte d'Or, getting rarer towards the east, with the exception of the North Mayenne, where 25 of them have been found. So there's a lot of stelae in Mayenne as well. With the rise of Christianity, they were almost always relocated near the churches. This is another example outside a church. And in the same church, Sheila na gig. So this because they're a bit too saucy. But she really is the Barbara Windsor of medieval church iconography. The most important group of stones is at Le Petit Croix, at the eastern edge of a town called Marseille-le-Ville. Typically they have rounded tops, and they seem to me to be a bit like a small family. Perhaps if they were memorial stones, then the size would relate to the status of the person. This is the myth in France. As late as the 1960s, children still chanted the legend of the Brittany and Menhirs as follows. All these stones were once raised off my talk. I apologise for this photograph because it was in a darkened museum through a glass cabinet, so it's not a brilliant photograph. But this is a mysterious object that was found in the Mayenne. It's a dodecahedron. 24 of these have been found in the northwestern area of France, more precisely the least Romanised bit, basically, but from the Roman era. A number of explanations, some of them laughable, have been put forward concerning these enigmatic objects. The head of a baton or knobs on the top, 5 knobs on the bottom, 10 in the middle, and there are 12 holes. This object seems to me again to be a later metal replica of the earlier stone objects which were found in Aberdeenshire in Scotland. They were not intended as practical objects, but seem to embody the power of the individual who held them. I know that Hugh's particularly interested in this. I can't wait to read your theories. Somebody once said, and I apologize, of humankind's first efforts thousands of years ago to connect with the cosmos and feel some sense of place in time and space, to the fact that in the last few years we have all witnessed images of our planet from space. And John Stuart Mill said, it often happens that the universal belief of one subsequent age so palpable an absurdity that the only difficulty is to imagine how such an idea could ever have appeared credible. The notion that the ancients were somehow savage and unsophisticated, and that we progress through time in a linear fashion towards some kind of ultimate knowledge, is one such ancients' knowledge of this planet was, and its place in the cosmos. Everyone in our age is experiencing the consequences of a discordant and detached relationship with their environment, and if, by studying the stones, we can understand something of our ancestors' relationship with the earth, for listening to me. Yeah.